This is a first for me. I'm doing a book review on my YouTube channel. Susan B. Anthony. Earlier in the year, I had heard it was her 200th birthday, and I realized other than her being on the $1 coin and her fighting for women for the right to vote, I knew nothing about her. And I love the study of history. And I thought it was a shame and sad that I knew nothing about this woman. So I sought out a book that I was going to read this year to find out more about her. And it was quite a fascinating book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As you can see here, my final rating on the book was 8.75. I gave it 8.5 for interesting, 8.5 for captivating, out of 10, all these out of 10, informative 10. There's tons of information here. I learned so much. It got a 10 out of 10 on informative. It's in my rating system, it's very difficult to get 10 on anything. Characters, 8.5. Now, if I'd only judged it by Susan B. Anthony, it'd been 10. I really, really admire her. But there are a lot of other characters in the book that weren't quite as enduring as her. So 8.5 overall for characters. Readability, 8. Because sometimes it read like a textbook. Sometimes it was kind of, had some boring parts, but for the most part, it was very good and quotable, or some great quotes. What makes you think? 9 out of 10. The book was written, by the way, by Alma Lutz, who did a great job with the material she had. And Susan B. Anthony, let's start this. She was raised by a Quaker father. Her father was really religious. And, she wanted to teach her siblings, certain things. She taught the children to recite poetry. She drilled them regularly in calisthenics and longed to add music as well. But Daniel Anthony, her Quaker father, would not allow this. Quakers believed that music might seduce the thoughts of the young. So Susan, although she often had a song in her heart, had to repress it and never knew the joy of singing the songs of childhood. Man, music's awesome. That is so sad. It reminds me of my childhood, even in the 80s. In the 80s, I went to a Baptist church here in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and this is exactly what some leaders in my Baptist church in the early 80s, 1980s, not 1880s, told me. More than one leader of that church told me if you listen to the wrong type of music, it might make young men like myself have sexual urges. I thought, but did not say at the time, believe me, young men don't need music to give them sexual urges. All they need is a heartbeat. That was so goofy, but I was told that just the beat by itself did something to young men to make them think about sex or something. But anyway, let's go on to the next thing I've got quoted here. We're now getting into some subject matter that may cause me some problems because some of this is very sensitive stuff, such as I believe we are a noble nation. I believe we have done far more good than harm in the world, the United States of America. I believe we are a great and mighty country who has freed so many. But yet, as all countries, we have things in our past that are absolutely disgusting. We have things in our past that are just horrible to even think on. We have sinned in the past against man, against God, against nature. We need to talk about that and we need to think about that. But just because of our sins of the past does not make us a horrible, disgusting place. We have over time made up for that by far. And, every day we strive to be better every day. So think about that as we get into subject matter of women being second-class citizens and slavery and whatnot. You may have different beliefs than me, and that's fine, but that's just what I believe. Okay, let's look at this quote. At this time in history, I believe it was 1850 something, 1851, 1852 is when we're talking about. During that year, and this is New York state law, a father had the legal authority to apprentice or wheel away a child without the mother's consent, and an employer was obliged by law to pay a wife's wages to her husband. In the state of New York, and probably a lot of other states, but in the state of New York where Susan B. Anthony worked, if a woman was a teacher or worked as a seamstress or anything, then the employer, by law, could not give her wages without her husband's permission. Her husband could come up and take them and go to the bar and drink her wages away if you wanted to, or do whatever you wanted to. Give the child away, send it off to school without her having any say-so whatsoever. Terrible. Terrible. Now we're getting into a really touchy subject. Frederick Douglass versus Susan B. Anthony. You know, this is after the Civil War was over, but before the 15th Amendment was passed. So black people still could not vote. Neither could women, of course. And Susan B. Anthony wanted the 15th Amendment to say that, everybody could vote. But the Republican Party, who was fighting for the 15th Amendment, Democrat Party fighting against it, the Republican Party fighting for the 15th Amendment, they told Susan B. Anthony, screw you. We'll concentrate on the black man first, then we'll get around to you eventually, which they had no intentions getting around to them. They weren't that interested in women having the right to vote. But neither party. But anyway, Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony went back and forth a little bit. And before I read these next few quotes, just keep in mind, it was a different time. Susan B. Anthony said some things here that'll make your skin crawl, by the standards of 2020. She did not consider herself a racist at the time. And according to the standards of the time, she wasn't a racist. But sadly, children were taught a certain thing. A certain group was inferior, a certain group was superior, taught that from the time of their birth. So while we can't understand it, just keep that in mind, while I read some of these quotes, okay? What troubled her most at these meetings was not the animosity directed against her by Henry Blackwell and Lucy Stone, but the assertion made by Frederick Douglass and agreed to by all the men present. And I'm not saying certain words here because I'm afraid that YouTube will take this down. I'm afraid they'll take it down just by the word being here, but, oh well. That agreed to by all men that black suffrage was more urgent than woman suffrage. Offering a resolution endorsing the 15th Amendment, Frederick Douglass quoted Julia Ward Howe as saying, now here's what this chickadee said, "I am willing that the black man shall get the ballot before me." And he added, "I cannot see how anyone can pretend that there is the same urgency in giving the ballot to women as to the black man." So Frederick Douglass definitely, looking at this quote, was like, we're more important. Give us the vote. Screw those women. This did not sit well with Susan B. Anthony. She stood up and said, "The old anti-slavery school says that women must stand back, that they must wait until male blacks are voters. But we say, if you would not give the whole loaf of justice to an entire people, give it to the most intelligent first." See what I'm saying? Susan B. Anthony certainly thought that she was more intelligent than the average black male. We would consider that extremely racist today. But, man, you make your own judgment. I'm kind of forgiving for people who were born in the past because of the way they were raised, the things they were taught, which were not right, but they were taught it from just make your own judgment. I'm not going to hold it against her. Okay, so she said, give the vote to the most intelligent first. Here she was greeted with applause and continued, if intelligence, justice, and morality, here she goes, if intelligence, justice, and morality are to be placed in the government, then let the question of woman be brought up first and that of black people last. Mr. Douglass talks about the wrongs of the black man, how he is hunted down, but with all the wrongs and outrages that he today suffers, he would not exchange his sex and take the place of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And then he stood up and he said, I want to know if granting you the right of suffrage will change the nature of our sexes. She said it will change I'm so dumb, I don't know what that word is. It will change the position of woman. Pecuniary. I'm from Arkansas education. You have to forgive me. It will change the position of women, Susan retorted before the shouts of laughter had died down. She will not be compelled to take hold of only such employments as man chooses for her. Lucy Stone, who so often in her youth had pleaded with Susan and Frederick Douglass for both black and women, now entered the argument. She had matured, but her voice had lost none of its conviction or its power to sway an audience. Disagreeing with Douglas' assertion that black suffrage was more urgent than women's suffrage, she pointed out that white women of the North were robbed of their children by the law just as black women had been by slavery. And that was certainly true in some situations. This was one of my favorite parts of the book. She wrote this part so well, the author, that I felt like I was there, and they were going back and forth in the convention hall, giving their different arguments over which was more important, the black vote or a women vote. Too bad we couldn't have been more decent and just let everybody vote at that time, but that just wasn't who we were at that time, sadly. But it was a great, fantastic back and forth, and I left a lot of it out. If you read this book, you're going to enjoy that part. Now we're getting into the most shocking part of the book. Susan B. Anthony illegally voted. A matter of fact, President Donald Trump pardoned her this year, I think on the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women finally the right to vote. He pardoned her for illegally voting. But, she went to trial for it. She wound up being charged, I think, $100, which was a heck of a lot of money back then. And whatever the fine was, I may be wrong about the $100, but I think that's right. She said, "I will never pay one penny of your unjust fine." And she never did. So anyway, the trial was absolutely fascinating. The judge was a jerk, even for that time period. This judge, Hunt, his last name is Hunt, I do hold this against him. Because while I feel it's unfair to judge people of history by today's standards, judging him by the standards of the day, he was an absolute prick. And matter of fact, he broke the law. He's a judge, and he broke the law even of the day. Let's see what happened. Charged with the crime of voting illegally, Susan was brought to trial on June 17, 1873, in the peaceful village of some peaceful town in New York. Canandaigua, New York. Okay. Now, at the close of the district attorney's argument, they argue back and forth, talking about why she should be prosecuted and why she shouldn't. And she was arguing under the 14th Amendment. Then she had the right to vote. And she's trying to get women all over the country to vote in that election year using the 14th Amendment as their reasoning. And she was disheartened that very few women did that. But anyway, they argued back and forth, the attorneys did. And at the close of the district attorney's argument, Judge Hunt, without leaving the bench, drew out a written document and, to her surprise, read from it as he addressed the jury. The right of voting, or the privilege of voting, he declared, is a right or privilege arising under the Constitution of the state, not the United States. The legislation of the state of New York has seen fit to say that the franchise of voting should be limited to the male sex. If the 15th Amendment had contained the word sex, the argument of the defendant would have been potent. The 14th Amendment gives no right to a woman to vote, and the voting of Miss Anthony was in violation of the law. And then he started reading a bunch more, which I'm not going to bother going over. It was kind of interesting, but it's lengthy, and this video is already going to be long enough. But let's get to this part. Then, hesitating a moment, he concluded, and this is the part that I find utterly baffling. Baffling, unjust, illegal, just a bad thing. The judge, he should have been thrown off the bench. But anyway, then hesitating a moment, he concluded, upon the evidence, I suppose there is no question for the jury, and that the jury should be directed to find a verdict of guilty. He's in there telling the jury what they must do as far as the verdict goes. I'm directing you to find a verdict of guilty. Immediately, Henry Selden, her lawyer, was on his feet, addressing the judge, requesting that the jury determine whether or not the defendant was guilty of a crime. Judge Hunt, however, refused and firmly announced, The question, gentlemen of the jury, in the form it finally takes, is wholly a question or question of law. And I have decided, as if he's God, and I have decided as a question of law in the first place that under the 14th Amendment, which Miss Anthony claims protects her, she was not protected in the right to vote. And I have decided also, this prick continued, that her belief and the advice which she took does not protect her in the act which she committed. If I'm writing this, the result must be a verdict on your part of guilty, and therefore I direct, in other words, I order you to find a verdict of guilty. He took away her right to a jury trial, turned it into a bench trial. Again, Henry Selden was on his feet. That is a direction, he declared, that no court has power to make in a criminal case. The courtroom was tense, Susan watching the jury and wondering if they would meekly submit to his will. Heard the judge tersely order, "Take the verdict, Mr. Clerk." "Gentlemen of the jury," intoned the clerk, "hearken to your verdict as the court has recorded it. You say you find the defendant guilty of the offense whereof she stands indicted, and so say you all." Claiming exception to the direction of the court, let the jury find a verdict of guilty in this, a criminal case, Henry Selden asked that the jury be polled. To this, Judge Hunt abruptly replied, "No. Gentlemen of the jury, you are discharged." And that was that. My God, I mean, jeez. That poor woman. I could talk about this book for a lot longer, but this is already long enough. I am going to put at the end some stuff I cut out just because it was too long, and I didn't like the way it turned out a whole lot anyway. But if you want to hear a few more comments about it, just listen up. And if not, thanks for watching this much of it. Appreciate it. Don't expect much from these next two. Again, I don't like the way it turned out, these next two quotes. But anyway, doesn't matter. Have a great day, y'all. And buy this book. Buy this book. Read this book. Study your history. Man, I tell you, the history is so freaking interesting. And this book, while at times was kind of boring, at other times it was exhilarating. It was awesome. And I'm going to do this maybe once a year. I'm going to find somebody in history that I don't know a whole lot about and read a book about that person. Because while I do study history, there's just so much I don't know about history. So much of it. And there's so many stories out there, true nonfiction stories that I have not delved into, that I want to read them. I want to find out more. Yeah. Go out and buy this book. Just do that. Or at least honor Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass and all those people that came before us that paved the way for this great country of ours. You would not have the freedoms you do today. You would not have the lifestyle you do today. You would not have your first world problems. You would not be where you are were it not for the people that came before you, both good and bad. Both good and bad. And if it were not for the Constitution of the United States of America. God bless this country. God bless the people of history. God bless our forefathers. You have a great day. Okay, let's look at this quote. The Reverend A.D. Mayo, Unitarian clergyman of Albany, heretofore Susan's loyal champion, now made a point of reproving her. You are not married. She was talking about, women should have the right to divorce. And in divorce, they should have, get equal stuff, and she's talking about marriage in general. But he said, you are not married, he declared with withering scorn. You have no business to be discussing marriage. To this, you have no business discussing marriage because you're not married. To this, she retorted, well, Mr. Mayor, you are not a slave. Suppose you quit lecturing on slavery. How many times I've heard that in my life? People say, you are not of this color, so you have no right to discuss the issues of that race. Or you are not of this land, or you are not this, or you are not that, so shut up. Yeah, it's ridiculous today, and it was ridiculous then, in my opinion. Let's go on to the next thing I've got quoted here. The honest The honest, earnest man must stand and work, the woman also, otherwise she drops at once below the dignity of man, accepting serfdom. Free men freely work. Whoever fears God fears to sit at ease. I highlighted this just for one reason. My grandfather, he believed that, uh, if you didn't work, you were pretty much sinning. A man that doesn't work shouldn't eat. And I guarantee you, if you went back to 1840 and you grab, a farmer or somebody that worked hard, a normal person, average person, brought them to today, if they were religious, there's a very good chance they would think our 40-hour work week of just, is just almost sinful. It's just not right. It's against God. It just shows how times change, how things change over time, people's attitudes and stuff, which reminds me of this next quote I have. Let's look at this. With the nation as with the individual, every new experience forces us into a new and higher life, and the old self is lost forever. Absolutely true. We are a completely different country than we were in 1840 and 1850. We're a completely different country than we were in 1960. I'm a completely different person than I was when I was 18. How many of us have said when we're 50 years old, 60 years old, if I could wake up tomorrow and be 18 with the knowledge I have now and with the experiences I have now, how much better would my life be at this point? It's like they say, too bad they waste the youth on the ignorant. As you get old, you get wiser. But, it is what it is. But I just found these two quotes interesting.